Right. Well, good morning, Wilshire. It is good to be with you all again in the Facebook Live Sunday School class. I want to give everybody a few uh, moments to jump in and join us. For those that might want to have their scripture text available, I'm going to be using Luke 4, 18 to 19. So you're welcome to pull that up on your computer or open up your Bible to have Luke 4, 18 to 19 ready. That will be our text that we'll read together and that we'll kind of imaginatively kind of sit with for a few minutes as part of our lesson. So I'm grateful for the chance to be back with you all. I'm going live here from my daughter's bedroom, so that's why you have some of the pink in the background. Pink is her favorite color. I'm wearing purple, my favorite color, and yeah, so it is so good to be with you all. So I've entitled today's lesson, "The Dirt We Grew Up In." The dirt we grew up in. And admittedly, I'm a bit anxious or nervous about bringing today's lesson because I am taking a risk and bringing a lesson that I think will touch some nerves. It makes me nervous and anxious when the conversation comes up. I'm sure it maybe makes you nervous or anxious or maybe a bit angry or frustrated. But I want to talk about the dirt we grew up in, our backgrounds, our stories, as it relates to privilege. And I know privilege is a really kind of hot topic. It's a buzzword that stirs up a lot of emotion, particularly in white folks. But it's an important thing for us to wrestle with and consider. And so my hope in today's lesson is that this is not accusatory in any way. It is not meant to bring shame or to shame others or anything like that. But I want to invite you, as a number of the teachers from Facebook Live the last few weeks have been using kind of reflective exercises in lots of different ways to try to enter into a space where we can reflectively think about privilege and maybe consider that we might have some blind spots in our own lives and in our own stories. Maybe some of the language that we use or stereotypes that we hold about someone or caricatures that we allow to inform what we think of folks. That maybe we need to be aware of those things, some of those racist tendencies, even, and be open to some correction and to some learning and to some growth. But I want to use this metaphor of dirt to help us enter into our conversation today. So again, I've entitled this lesson, "The Dirt We Grew Up In." And so kind of my first wondering is, does dirt make us dirty? Does dirt make us dirty? I've got young kids who love to get outside and play in the dirt. So does dirt make us dirty? Or is dirt part of the fabric, part of the essence of life? I think that dirt is full of potential and possibilities in life. But dirt has to be nurtured and tilled and worked with and cared for and watered in order for newness of life to come about. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to be a little vulnerable with you all and tell you a little bit about the dirt I grew up in. I grew up in pretty conservative Baptist settings in the South, Florida and Virginia and Georgia. I was dedicated by the Reverend Dr. Jerry Falwell Sr. at Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg, Virginia. My father was a student at Liberty University at the time, worked security for Jerry Falwell, and so Dr. Falwell dedicated me. That's how deep some of my dirt, if you will, some of my backgrounds and very conservative or even fundamentalist forms of Christianity run. My dad is a pastor, has been for over 30 years, and has worked in a number of different church settings, many of which were pretty conservative Baptist settings in Virginia and Georgia, and then even shifting over to some conservative non-denominational settings in Oklahoma. My grandfather was a lifelong church deacon, my dad's father, lifelong church deacon and Sunday school teacher. My mother's father was a deacon and a volunteer music minister in his church for a number of years. And our family, we weren't bad people per se, but looking back into my stories and some of my memories and some of the phrases that I still struggle with today that want to come out sometimes, we had acceptable racist language and thinking that were part of the dirt we grew up in. You see, we are all born from dirt. It's from dirt or dust that we have come, and to dust we will return, as it tells us in Genesis 3. And I want to be vulnerable again and share a very real story, one that stirs up a lot of emotion in me of how some of this dirt came out in my own life. Several years ago, I was talking to a work colleague, and we were talking about some of the new chaplain interns that were starting, and she was asking me to, kind of show them the lay of the land and how things work in that particular hospital system. And I said to her, and she is a black woman, I said, "Don't worry, I'll get them whipped into shape." And she looked at me, and I can still see the look on her face. And she said, "Excuse me, Chad?" And that was the first time I had ever considered what the phrase whipped into shape meant. That on plantations and enslaved periods, enslaved persons were whipped into shape to learn the rules and the ways that things were done on that plantation or that slave owner. And I looked into her eyes with tears and I said, "I am so sorry. I just, for the first time, realized what that phrase means, looking into your eyes as a black woman. And I want you to know I am going to work so hard not to ever use that phrase again." And so I tell that story just to show you how raw and real this is and how important these conversations are, to reflect upon the dirt that we grew up in, the stories that our families tell, the ideas that we hold about different groups of people, the language that we use. Oftentimes we don't necessarily have bad intent with it, but that does not excuse the impact of our words. I didn't intend anything bad. It was just a phrase I had used and heard from family members and coaches and Sunday school teachers and in all kinds of settings that came out and in that moment had very real consequences for me. But I have tried to own that and use that to grow and to learn and to go forward differently in ways that I think and ways that I talk. And so I want us to go to Luke chapter 4 for our scripture text today. And in Luke 4, the start of the 4th chapter is oftentimes called the temptation of Jesus. And so Luke has his version, Matthew has his version as well. And so kind of in my imaginative reflection of this text, I've kind of wondered what it might be like if this temptation were to happen in 2020. If Jesus were tempted today, what might the temptations of the devil or the evil one or Satan, what might that have sounded like to Jesus? You see, Jesus is returning from this temptation in the wilderness. That's where we find Jesus going to his local synagogue or temple in verse 18. But I just kind of wonder, what was that temptation like for Jesus and what might it sound like today? So imagine with me, perhaps the devil telling Jesus that he should utilize his privilege as the Son of God to turn stones into bread, saying, you don't have to work for it, Jesus. Just take a shortcut. It's your right because of who you are and who your family is. Don't work for it. Just snap your fingers and make it happen. Take what's yours because of who you are and who your family is. Perhaps the devil was saying things like, Jesus, you've got you've got access to so much, right? You are a privileged person in your own right. As the Son of God, you could have wealth and political influence and power if you'll only bow down to me, to my authority, to my ideology, to my flag, to my pledge, to my anthem. Jesus, if you'll just bow down to these things, you can have it all. The devil takes Jesus onto the top of the temple and encourages him to misuse his power for his own benefit again and to throw himself down, and says, just do whatever you want, and your parents will save you. They'll send someone in, Jesus, your dad will, to swoop you up and save you. The rules don't apply to you because of who you are and who your family name is, Jesus as the Son of God. And yet, Jesus overcomes the temptations. He returns to his community and he goes to his local temple or synagogue and is handed a scroll from Isaiah. And Jesus reads what I believe kind of outlines his purpose, his plan, his goals, his mission for his life and ministry in the world. And he says this in Luke 4:18-19. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. May God bless the reading of God's word. So what does it mean today in our context, here in the Dallas area metroplex? What does it mean to bring good news to the poor? Would you just kind of wonder with me about that for a second and try to put aside maybe any left or right things, try to hold those to the side and just lean in with me and wonder, what does it mean to bring good news to the poor? Livable wages, a higher minimum wage perhaps, maybe better access to food, as so many communities sit in food deserts where they don't have access to anything other than corner stores and fast food. They don't have grocery stores closely accessible to them. Maybe good news to the poor is reduced cost childcare, better hours and more access to public transportation, more economic equality and opportunity, paid sick time so that you don't have to use your PTO time or have your pay docked if your kids get sick, perhaps. What does it mean to bring good news to the poor today? Who are the captives that are bound in America here now in 2020? Maybe it's those who are stuck in debt. Maybe it's those that are stuck in debt because of medical bills and they just can't get out from under it. Maybe it's the stigma that being a felon gives you for the rest of your life and you can't find a decent job or a decent place to live because of a choice you made years ago, but you have the label felon. Maybe it's student loan debt that you have paid and you owe more now than you did then, but you've been paying faithfully for years. Maybe it's that you have to use payday lenders because you don't have access to a bank or not able to get to a loan, and so you are held captive by a payday lender. Maybe it's that you don't have access to affordable housing, or you're at risk of eviction because of COVID and you feel stuck and held captive by a broken system. Maybe it's the systemic oppression that seems to affect particular communities way more than others, black and brown people. Would you wonder with me, who are the captives today in 2020 here in Dallas? Who are the blind, and what does it mean to be blind in 2020? I think Jesus was probably talking about those who were literally blind in his context, but I imagine Jesus also meant those who were figuratively blind. So who are the blind today? Maybe it's those with health challenges and physical challenges that Jesus desires to bring healing to. Maybe it's those that have treatable conditions like diabetes, but the drug prices are astronomical. Maybe that's the blind today. Maybe it's the figuratively blind. Maybe it's those who are so caught up in their ideologies and their beliefs and the things of their political party. How does the Spirit of God help recover their sight? Help recover my sight? When a particular issue is the be-all, end-all, and that's all you can see, and that affects everything that you believe or who you will vote for. Maybe it's those that are just blind or choose to ignore data and facts and science. Maybe it's those who are blind and just so caught up in their fundamentalist views from the left or right, because fundamentalists exist on both sides. What does it mean to be blind today? Who are the blind here in our context right now? And who are the oppressed? Black and brown people of color, those that are caught up in a broken justice system that does not seem to bring much justice, those who are caught driving or walking or jogging while black. But then on the flip side, who are the oppressors? Those who are oppressed in different ways because they are the oppressors. And what does it mean to bring justice and freedom to those who are the oppressors? Because this good news is for all of us. What does it mean to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor in Dallas, in the United States in 2020? Better access to healthcare or universal healthcare, perhaps. Debt forgiveness, affordable housing, the reallocation of funds for public services that help better address the needs of the public, like mental health workers and social workers and others with more specialized training where law enforcement officers just aren't the best and most trained and capable people for certain situations. I don't know. I am just wondering, what does it mean to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor here and now? What does it mean to bring good news in a world that is experiencing so much hardship and pain and brokenness from all sides? What does it mean to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor? So if God is still speaking today, and that's a slogan for our siblings in the United Church of Christ, that God is still speaking, what might God be trying to say to us? What if Jesus really meant what he read from the scroll in Luke 4? If that really was why Jesus came, what does it mean for us today, right now, as followers in the way and the teachings of Jesus? Can we even hear the voice of God in the midst of all the noise, in the midst of our own voices and opinions? Can we hear the still small voice of God saying, "This is the way of Jesus. Will you join me? Will you follow me?" There's a black woman of color named Francesca Ramsey, and she's done a variety of things in kind of her career. A number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, she was known for a series of videos that she did for MTV addressing really hard topics about things like the Black Lives Matter movement and privilege and things like you might hear like black on black crime and things such as that. And she had these great videos that are 4 or 5 minutes long. And she gave me a definition of privilege a couple years ago that I found really helpful. And so this is what she says, and this comes from Francesca Ramsey. She says, "Privilege does not necessarily mean you're rich, a bad person, have had everything handed to you, or have never had challenges or struggles." And here's the kicker. She says this: "Privilege just means there are some challenges and struggles you won't experience because of who you are." So for me, as a white guy, as a male who identifies as heterosexual, who is very well educated, there are things I just won't experience and understand because of who I am. So she gives a number of examples, and I resonate with some of these examples of what that privilege might mean. And so I want to share some of those quickly with you. So, for example, as an able-bodied person, I've never had to worry about how I was going to get into a building, or if there would be a parking spot available so I could get out of my vehicle, or if there would be accessible bathroom facilities. I've never had to worry about that. So that's a privilege I enjoy. I've never not gotten a job because my resume my name sounded black, or my accent or form of English was difficult, and maybe an interviewer had a bit of a difficult time understanding my accent. That's never happened to me. That's a privilege I enjoy. I've never had to worry about being affectionate with Heather in public, because heterosexuality is the norm, right? That's a privilege that we are granted, but our LGBTQ siblings and friends, they don't have that privilege necessarily, even still today. They have to worry about being feared or being mocked. They have to perhaps hold hands in fear, not knowing if that will be acceptable, if people will point at them, things of that sort. I don't have to deal with that because of who I am. I've never been threatened or harmed because of my sexual identity. You may or may not know this, but Texas and specifically Dallas have a high murder rate of transgender persons. At least 14 transgender persons have been murdered in Texas since 2016. And in Dallas, specifically since May of 2018, there have been 4 transgender persons who have been murdered, including most recently on June 30th, 2020, Mercy Mack was murdered. She was a 22-year-old black transgender woman who was murdered right here in Dallas. Nationally, she is the 18th transgender person to be murdered in the United States. I'm privileged because I don't have to live with that fear. I've never faced housing discrimination or not been able to get a loan or had my home appraised for less than its value due to the color of my skin. I run 4 to 5 days a week, typically around 5 a.m., and I have done so for 10 plus years, and I have never once been stopped by police or had people in the neighborhood follow me and question me for what I was doing here because it was thought that I didn't belong or I looked suspicious. I saw this on Facebook yesterday. It said, if you've never had a Supreme Court case decide if you have the same rights as others, you have privilege. If you've never had a Supreme Court case decide if you have the same rights as others, then you have privilege. I think of amendments in our Constitution. The 13th Amendment regarding slavery. The 15th Amendment giving all men the right to vote. The 19th Amendment around women's suffrage and the right to vote. It's just always been assumed that I, as a white guy, have all these rights. And oftentimes we feel like maybe our privileges are being taken from us or squashed in some way because we feel we can't say anything. There's often at times an outcry about being politically correct, and I can't say this anymore because I have to be PC, politically correct. Maybe you feel anxious about this because maybe someone has called out racist language or phrases that you've used and you've felt embarrassed or maybe even shamed. You know, sometimes it's hard and it's uncomfortable, and that is okay, because the only way we are going to grow and change is if we embrace some of this discomfort, and if we examine the dirt we grew up in and say, this dirt needs some work. I need to take out some of these rocks that are just not helpful, that have been part of the foundation of my life and my story, but they can't be here anymore. So I've got to do the hard work to dig them up and to get rid of them, because that's going to bring harm and pain and hurt to the lives of others if I allow that rock to stay there. I need to rework the soil so that I can plant new things and have newness of life. Freedom of speech for us does not mean freedom of consequence. We can say whatever we want, but there may be consequences. We may not have negative intent, but that does not excuse the impact that our words make, as I shared earlier. There's a really great and helpful book that I would recommend. It's called The Myth of Equality: Uncovering the Roots of Injustice and Privilege. And it's written by a theologically conservative but socially somewhat progressive pastor up in Oregon named Ken Weitzma. Heather and I had an opportunity to intern with him while we were completing our MDiv degrees a number of years ago. And in that book, it's probably a bit dated now, but he cites some important data. He says this. He says, in a recent Barna survey, only 56% of evangelicals agreed that people of color are often placed at a social disadvantage, and that is lower than the national average of 67%. But at the same time, 95% of evangelicals think the church plays a critical role in social reconciliation. That is higher than the national average of 73%. So taken together, these findings reveal that those who believe they are the most equipped to deal with reconciliation actually don't think it is as needed as much as other Americans do. I find that really striking. He goes on surveying some more data from a Barna survey, and he says this. He says, more than any other segment of the population, white evangelical Christians demonstrate a blindness to the struggle of their African American brothers and sisters. And this is a dangerous reality, he says, for the modern church. So I recognize that for many of us white folks, we tend to shut down when we hear the word privilege. I would venture to guess that maybe some people heard my topic and they went ahead and signed off and said, nope, I'll pick back up on Facebook Live next week. It is hard to talk about the privileges of our whiteness. It is hard to talk about things like white supremacy and racism, but we have got to have these conversations. We just cannot push them to the side or allow our discomfort to say that's what's going to prevail. I'm uncomfortable, so I'm not going to deal with it. I'm going to put my head in the sand. We cannot do that anymore. One of my favorite teachers says this. She says, the most important question we can ask ourselves on a daily basis is, what is mine to do? What is mine to do? So as white people and as a predominantly white church, what is ours to do in this whole conversation? What about ism? What about this? What about that? That's a way to deflect from the work that we need to do. We can't fall prey to what about ism. We have to own things. It might be a valid question, but we cannot use that whataboutism to keep us from engaging this hard work that is ours to do. It's not for our black and brown siblings and friends. It is our work to do. A prayer that helps orient me to this question of what's mine to do is this, and it's a spin on the Serenity Prayer. I share it in lots of different settings, and it says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the ones I can, and the wisdom to know it is me. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the ones I can, and the wisdom to know it's me. So what can I do? What can you do to address how we respond to words like privilege? What do I need to learn and to continue to learn about my own privilege? What do I need to learn about my biases, my prejudices, my racist views that are within me and they are part of the dirt that I grew up in and was nurtured in? And if I don't think I have any of these things, which I will be honest and I've already shared a story, I have them, right? And there are people that are helping me in my journey call out these blind spots. Who are those people in your life? Who are those that can help you see, that can reflect with you to say, that phrase that you use, do you know the origins of it? Have you ever stopped to think what it means? The idea that you hold about a particular person or the driving habits of a group of people, have you ever stopped to think about how that's a bit racist, how you hold a prejudice against someone? Who are the people of color that we need to be listening to and reading and learning from to get a deeper perspective on what it means to be a person of color in America today? I'm not asking them to do the work for us, that's ours to do. But we have got to be listening to podcasts and reading books and articles and having conversations with people to grow in this awareness. So, what's a practical application? Leslie Newbigin is one of my favorite theologians. He was a white guy and served much of his life in India, and then went back to England and lived in a place that had changed over the time he was in India, 20 or 30 years, and came back to a community that looked very different. And he did some reflecting on privilege, and he talked about privilege as a responsibility. That I have this privilege, I have this responsibility, and I need to be a good steward of it. And so I've adapted a couple of thoughts that he gives on privilege as responsibility to help us in this as we wrap up this conversation today. So he says regarding privilege as responsibility, to listen and learn. The first thing we have to do is listen and learn. We have to learn about the experiences of others. We have to learn about our privilege, and we need to reflect on it. We need to listen to the feedback that people give, and we need to learn. And then out of this, we move into a time of reflection. We need to resist. We need to sorry, I think I might be having technical difficulties, so I got a bit distracted. We need to reconstruct. He talks about thinking through our experiences, our blind spots, maybe resisting that we might just want to dismiss something, right? Because it's uncomfortable. That's privilege, just to say I'm going to dismiss it and move past it. And we can't do that. So we need to reflect, we need to resist dismissing, and we need to begin to reconstruct our perspectives and opinions and views in a way that is aware of our privilege and that helps us as we move forward, so then that we can begin to partner and promote. We need to partner with people of color and others and allow them to lead and to come alongside and to support, so that we can promote things like equality and rights and the experience and perspective of others, and hold those things up and use our privilege in a way that is responsible and that works towards the good of others. So as I wrap up, what is the good news we need to hear today? And what areas of life do we need liberation and reconciliation and release? What are those blind spots? And if you don't think you have any, who can you maybe talk with that could help you see some areas of growth that you're blind to? Where in life are we the oppressors, and who are we oppressing? How can we live out Jesus' words in Luke 4? How can we embrace those words? I want to close again by reading Luke 4, and that this would be our prayer and our challenge for the day and week ahead. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because God has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. God has sent us to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Wilshire, thank you for allowing me to have this difficult conversation with you. Feel free to reach out to me personally, and I would love to continue this conversation with you. I'm open to your feedback, as I know this was a challenging lesson that is unsettling for me. I imagine it was unsettling for you. but I want to be in conversation with you. I want to be a partner in trying to live into the ways of Jesus, knowing that we all have our own work to do. So, Wilshire, as we approach this week, may we love God. May we embrace beauty wherever it is found. And may we bring good news as we help all of us together live life to the fullest. Amen.